Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Eunice. I'm an editor here at Webtoon. I've been here for a couple of years now, and as an editor, we see a lot of pitches come our way, and so I'm really happy that I get to discuss with you guys about how to kind of set up your series in a pitch style that can really highlight your story and kind of get the attention of possible editors or anyone else who might be interested in your series. Before I jump in to cover those topics, I will be kind of talking about how to set up what we call a pitch Bible. It's kind of what the term used for a lot of entertainment industries, not just Webtoon, but also animation, TV, and movies. And so before I get started on that, I kind of want to talk about some topics I think could be helpful for you before getting started. So I wrote these key points to think about before setting up your pitch Bible. First, I kind of want to talk about thinking about your audience. I don't know if you guys had the time. I'm sure you guys are all creators who may or may not have posted your series on Canvas already or elsewhere, but it always helps when you're thinking about pitching in a more like a serious and professional manner is to really think about what is your existing audience, and specifically who has been or what is your targeted demographic would be. So instances like this where it's good to think about, what is the age demographic that you kind of want your series to cater towards. Is it going to be something that fits for all ages? Is it something that will be marketed towards, maybe young adults? Or is it something that's more adult or mature? It's always good to kind of think about that. It's always kind of good to kind of jot it down as well. So that way it's easier to kind of keep in mind what the marketing approach could be for the series. And for instance, if it's all ages, make sure it's all appropriate and all good there. But it's always kind of it's good to think about what your existing audience would be. And it always helps to kind of be able to make sure that the story caters to your demographic. Other things to think about, especially if we're going for a more serious professional approach, is to really think about the potential competition that you'll be facing. Specifically for Webtoons, it's always kind of good to look around what series has been going on, what series has been doing well, and series that you enjoy. And possibly if you are going for a more serious direction, think about how your series will fit within that lineup. So things to think about is, how does your series stand out from others? It could not only just be through Webtoon, but just like the style of writing in general. Is it something that is considered unique? Is it something that maybe readers haven't seen a lot? It's always kind of good to see if you're writing in a certain genre that you think has been filled, but you still feel passionate about it. Think about how your story can still stand out in your own way. And lastly, think about what people are saying. If you guys are posting on Canvas, I think that's just a fantastic way to get started. You already have an audience who, has been checking out your series. And so, think about the feedback that you're getting. It could be things that doesn't have to just be nice comments, but it's also kind of good to see what your audience your readership are talking about. It's a really good way to kind of understand what your strengths are and see if you're putting a pitch together, kind of putting that forward and making sure that whoever is reading it gets to, see it clearly. Don't be afraid to utilize social media. It's just another great way of getting bigger responses if there's an audience out there, getting to engage with them. So really listening in and kind of seeing what the overall feedback of your story is. Onto the actual bulk of putting your pitch together. I'll be going over specific things that, at least for Webtoon, we'd be looking at if a pitch is sent to us. And I've divided into kind of two main parts. The first main part is what I consider the story profile. It's kind of what I consider the main foundation of your story. It's kind of, the main basic idea of what the overall, story would be categorized as. And I'll go over each one and kind of explain in a bit. Obviously, the first thing you want to include is your title. It's always kind of nice to see like your title alongside a visual, kind of give that really nice first impression. Make sure your title's there, loud and clear. Your log line. If you guys don't know what a log line is, it's sometimes also known as an elevator pitch. It's essentially a one sentence like description of your story as a whole. A good way to, I guess, look at it is if you're able to kind of summarize your story into one sentence, how would that look? You know, would it sound engaging? Will it sound interesting? Are you able to kind of captivate anyone just from a one sentence alone? If you're able to do so, I think it's probably a good sign. And so we'd always like to see a nice log line of just the story concept in general. There's an example here for Spirited Away. You know, it's about an adventure about a young girl trapped in a supernatural world where she is forced to work at a bathhouse in order to rescue her parents and herself. So how can you make it engaging? It'll be one of the early things that people will be looking at. Also, it's also just good to have it as a one sentence. If it goes longer than that, we'd probably categorize this as a summary. Moving on. So next things we'll be looking at is the genre. I think Canvas is already set where we have it so that you're able to kind of label your series as one main genre, and then you can have a subgenre afterwards. You can have multiple subgenres. But I think what will, at least for a pitch goes, will be kind of looking at what is essentially your main genre will be. If your series' main topic is under sci-fi, you can kind of see that there might be some certain expectations that would be, I guess, looked at based on how you kind of categorize it there. Things to, I guess, consider when kind of picking the right genre is to kind of ask questions for yourself as a reader. So usually when you're reading or you want to find a new series, a lot of times it's easy to just kind of look at, you know, the genre section, find what your interests are, and kind of see and ask questions about yourself. Is this series kind of filling in what my expectations and interests are? You know, what is my favorite thing about that said genre? Is it exactly what I was looking for? So if you ask questions such as this, you know, most likely readers are also going to kind of ask the same questions with your series as well. And so it's kind of a good way to think about, is this meeting readers' expectations based on, you know, how you categorize your series? And it could make a difference how you label it as. So make sure that is clear within your pitch, and you can add subgenres as well. Themes, I labeled this as essentially your message of the story. You know, it could be typical ways of how people kind of write it out. You know, it's a rag to riches story. It's a story about growing up, and there's kind of a lot out there. But I would say if you have a certain message that you want to tell with your story, this is kind of the space to include that in. Depending on how your theme is, I guess, written, it could make a strong impression based on whoever is reading it, whether they feel like they resonate with that story or they like the theme of or the messaging. It could make a difference. So it's good to kind of include it if possible. So kind of examples of a genre with the theme is, you know, would you categorize it as being, you know, is it a horror thriller story but with a hopeful message in the end? Or is it maybe a romance comedy that touches on, you know, journey of mental health? You could have all sorts of way of how you would describe it, but it really just kind of sets what I call the tone here. I've also included comparative titles. It's kind of helpful for the readers, I guess, whoever is looking at your pitch, to see comparative titles where it kind of gives a point of reference, at least when you're kind of presenting your story. Before we get to the bulk of it, it's always kind of nice to see, does this story compare to another existing story that we may have? It's always good to kind of see stories that, you know, have worked successfully, obviously, if you're going to compare yourself. But I want to take it in a way that, you know, has to be similar to something. You could have a completely original idea, but if anything, it could kind of help to maybe even cover like the type of similar genre that another medium has had. And so it could be, you know, not just Webtoon, but it could be other mediums like TV shows, movies, novels. It kind of gives at least the readers a reference point to see what to expect. And especially if it's a title that they, you know, greatly enjoy, it's like, oh, maybe I'd be interested in, you know, checking out even further. Next half I'll be covering is basically kind of the meat of your pitch, which is the story. I call it the story descriptions. This is the section where you can kind of talk about a summary. It could be a short summary, your character descriptions, and a series breakdown. So covering the short story or short summary, usually I like to have it as, or I tell people, try to have your summary within a 1 paragraph description. This is kind of the space where you give a little bit more context compared to, just a simple 1 sentence log line. This will be kind of how you would summarize your story. For instance, kind of like what is on, Webtoon, also on Canvas, where you have your story description. This could be similar, but I always like to tell people that it's good to include your story hook within that description. I know there's a panel going alongside this where we're talking about story hooks, but I always feel like this is a good space to include, what is your story, but what is essentially the hook of your story? And I think an easy way to look at that is, what is essentially going to draw your readers to come back on every new episode. For originals, it could be weekly, it could be like twice a week. But what is essentially is going to draw people to wanting to continuously check out your series in the long run. So have your summary written in a way that has people engaged. So if you feel like you've seen people commenting on your story that people really enjoy, you can include it here and see in a way in hopes of, whoever is reading your pitch can also understand what the hook of your story is. For character descriptions, this is kind of a segment where it's helpful to kind of expand a little bit on your characters that you'll be focusing on. I wrote main characters because it's always kind of nice to just see the main points in just your main cast. I think it could be too long if we cover too many characters, but focusing on just the main characters themselves, put a short description of them. It's a good space to show, what are essentially their wants and their needs, and what is their goal, and also what essentially is their role in the story. I think sometimes what people might mistake in this part is where they'll just kind of expand and cover the whole backstory of characters. But I think what helps in the long run, at least for those reading your pitch, is really just seeing who that character is and what makes them them. So kind of a good exercise that I like to recommend is thinking of a quote that the character would say. So if we could include a quote that a character would say that kind of encompasses their personality, I think it could immediately give a sense of who they are, at least for the readers, and also what makes them distinct, what makes them interesting. I think long form narrative stories really focuses on the characters, and so having very engaging characters, I think this is a place where you kind of want to touch on them and make them shine. And so the series breakdown, this is kind of where the main bulk of the story can be described in. I put 5 paragraphs max, but it's really just a way of condensing or trying to pick and choose moments that you think are crucial for the story. Kind of had to keep in mind that whoever is reading this, they want to continuously feel engaged, and so it can be easy to kind of wander off and kind of go into every single, detail, write it as a novel. But really, this is just kind of a pitch story. You want to kind of convince whoever is reading it to, want to, I guess, invest in it. And so if it's a narrative story I've written down here, this is a space to kind of cover your story from beginning to end. We want to know the ending because it's crucial for us to know what the main direction of the story is. So if you feel like you haven't really quite got that yet, this could be a time where you can at least practice, put it down in writing and see how you feel, and then kind of improve on it, refine it as you go. But for the sake of this pitch, it's always helpful to see what the whole story will look. And so if it's narrative, kind of including the classic story, I guess, setup where, you have your intro, your inciting incident, your rising climax or action, the climax, the falling action, and the conclusion. I think there's a lot of resources out there that kind of talks about these individual points and how to identify them within your story. So if it's narrative, we kind of want to see how the story will play out. What is the direction, and how will it leave a satisfying payoff at the end. So if your series isn't necessarily narrative, like a story where it has kind of a singular direction, like maybe let's say your story or your series is more like slice of life, like maybe it's a 4-panel comic about your dog. We're not necessarily going to expect a whole journey there unless you want to, but if it doesn't seem like it would fit in this format, what's important is really just seeing what this series, I guess, like selling point would be, and like seeing an example of your idea and how is it going to look on a continuous like weekly basis. If it's a comedy, we want to make sure that the punchline is always there at the end of episodes. If it's just a slice of life, how would you find ways to kind of get people to continuously be interested? So showing examples of that, I think, can kind of help give a sense of what your idea would be. So that is the main bulk of the story descriptions. The last part here is obviously your visuals. This is the space where you can include all your character designs. At this point we should have a pretty good sense of what the story is, what the characters' personalities are, what the story genre is. Now we have the other important side to that is the visuals, because it's Webtoon. So looking into character designs, there's a wonderful, handy, downloadable character sheet that's on Creator 101. Here's a screenshot of that. You guys can, if you haven't already, you can utilize that. It's always nice to kind of see what the characters look like in full. If you like have a fantasy story and it's like based in a setting that is completely original from you, like that'll be a really great way to see that in your designs. If the characters have a distinctive fashion, this is where you'd want to kind of show that off. Use that space to kind of present in a way that we can see the characters in full. And the other side to that is show example panels that you have and putting emphasis on putting your best work forward. Sometimes, you have creators, like you could be one yourself, or maybe, if you want to pitch, but then you kind of want to revamp some of your older work, you can put your canvas work as an example, but if you feel like you're eventually going to want to change it, if it, gets greenlit, you want to put in the example that, will be closest to what you want it to look like in the end, or if it goes through. And so putting old work might not be always the best example. You could also put example episodes. I say this because a lot of the attention will essentially be, since this is Webtoon is a pretty unique landscape where it's kind of different from a lot of other traditional comics. And so what's often important is how you're able to create episodes within the vertical format. And so how you present your episodes can kind of tell us a lot about, potential skill. And so putting your best work forward, imagine if this is how you want your original series to look like. That's what I would recommend. But feel free to put visuals all throughout your pitch. But those are kind of just the basic, I guess, topics for putting your pitch together. I know I'm kind of running close on time.
Oh, you're good. I'm going to answer some questions that were in the chats that I noticed. So this is basically a presentation on how to really put your thoughts and your ideas and your story into a very professional manner. This is if a Webtoon editor reaches out to you, you have the knowledge to put your series together in a pitch Bible and present it in a very professional manner. There was the question, do we give creators opportunities to pitch? By putting your series on Canvas, that is almost like a pitching process, because editors are always looking through Canvas and they're always looking for new series to greenlight. So by putting your series on Canvas, they have their eye on it. And then also it is the best way to also exemplify your what am I trying to say? Your ability to do the vertical scroll format, to continuously bring back readers, to know how to write a hook and know how to write characters, because they're seeing it in real time. They're seeing the updates that are happening. So that's just something to keep in mind when you put stuff on Canvas. The editors will probably eventually look at it at some point. And also that, brings back, we cannot accept all pitches because we only have so many editors to greenlight series and to help edit those series. So it's all about bandwidth as well. Somebody asked, what are your thoughts about loose style? Drawings that are not 100 or 200% polished, but has more of a sketchy style.
I would say to that, I can see that as being somewhat of a case-by-case basis. I think if it feels like there is a strong interest, especially with probably the reader engagement, that's obviously a positive thing. And so sometimes I feel like it works, sometimes it might not work. And so I would say don't feel restricted to always have to do something clean. I think if it works well with your existing style, and if people obviously are gravitating towards it, like that's obviously a really good sign. And so it helps to have clean just because it's easier just to look at in general. It's easier to tell what's going on within the scene, but that isn't necessarily to say that it has to be, just that. That's when I would say getting reader feedback, see what people are saying. It's always kind of the best way of seeing what, would work.
Seeing like what your I want to say take all reader feedback don't take it all to heart, because some people are wild, they will say some wild things in the comics, but some people actually have genuine like thoughts and feedback. So think about what your audience is saying. If they're saying like, oh, your font could use improvement, like maybe think, oh, why did they say that? Oh, you're right. You know what? I could improve on my font. Or, oh, this panel was kind of hard to understand what's going on. Think, oh, how could I have formed this panel to be more understandable? So these are just things that, think about, see what your audience is saying, and try to, take it with, like as a constructive criticism type of situation. Yes. And somebody else asked, creating a pitch, do you prefer it to be set up in a Word document like a book or in a presentation like this?
It does help to have it as a presentation, because something that I didn't mention prior, but having a pitch document, it always helps to have it kind of clear and concise and easy to read. I think sometimes if it's Word doc, could be kind of difficult to kind of get people's attention. And so a lot of times that doesn't necessarily say that, it doesn't always work, but it helps, especially if you want to kind of get that little bit of an advantage to kind of set it up in a way that it's, very engaging to look at, and, having visuals alongside it does help. Yeah, I would say there's, again, no strict ruling on that, but it does help to kind of see it in a way that will be easier for, whoever is checking out your series can understand the content. So yeah.
So we're actually out of time, but thank you so much for, joining our panel. And thank you, Eunice, for presenting.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fun being here. Hope that you guys helped this presentation. But yeah, it's really great. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.